Good morning. Welcome to Mainline Morning. I'm James Connors.
And I'm Brian Sizik. Today we have a very special guest, Philadelphia's own Leslie Gudel. She works for Comcast SportsNet. Welcome on the show, Leslie.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so Ms. Gudel, when did you know that you wanted to get into sports broadcasting?
Well, I was one of those who sort of discovered it a lot later than most people do because I went to UCLA. I got out of college. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I worked in the ever-exciting title insurance business for a few years because it was my dad's business. And I worked there for 4 or 5 years, and I said, you know, this is not what I want to do the rest of my life, and now's the time to make the change if I'm going to make it. And my dad had 3 girls, and one of us got dragged to, you know, the Dodger games and the Lakers games all the time. So I love sports, and that was when I decided I wanted to make the transition.
Right.
So did you have any education in the communications industry, or did...
I didn't, and most people do, and I highly recommend it if you want to get into the profession. But I was 27 years old when I changed careers, and I started interning at what was called Prime Ticket at the time. And I was working my day job and then going in at night, and most of the people, all the other interns were college students. And I took some advanced classes at UCLA after I'd graduated. You know, 5 years after I graduated, I went back and took broadcast news writing and different classes like that. So I did get some, but it was a little bit later.
Yeah.
So now Comcast SportsNet started in 1997, and it first started in Philadelphia, and you were right there from the very beginning. How did you get started there?
Well, I was working in LA, and then I like to say I was in between opportunities at the time. And I had interviewed a couple of places. One was Home Team Sports in DC, and the other was here. And I had been at Pocatello, Idaho for my first job, and then moved back to LA where I interned. I worked there. And they became Fox Sports and changed everybody. So I needed something to do, and I was hosting a NASCAR show on TNN, and I loved that. But it wasn't full-time work. So I got offers from Home Team Sports and Comcast SportsNet. When I interviewed here, it was a trailer. In fact, I came to Philadelphia the day it was supposed to be Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Finals between the Red Wings and the Flyers, but it never happened. I had tickets to the game and everything, and of course there was no game. But I interviewed here, and I just loved the vision that they had about making it one thing that you have to do in television, and especially now with the internet and the web, you know, with web-based media, is there's constantly change. So there's a huge investment, a gigantic investment by Comcast to build up the web-based media. So csnphilly.com, there's a real emphasis on bringing people who have names in the community into Comcast SportsNet, like Ray Dittinger. I mean, you know, you're going to get more traffic on our football site now than ever before because he's writing for us. So, I mean, he's a Hall of Fame writer. Yeah. Those types of things are the way we see, you know, you see television going.
Right. So tell us about your job on a day-to-day basis at Comcast.
Usually, I anchor. My job is to be the main anchor with Neil Hartman. But both of us, I was told a long time ago by a friend of mine who's a producer for 60 Minutes, that you can never be a great anchor unless you're a good reporter. Right. And it was some of the best advice I ever got, because when you're anchoring, you're sitting at a desk and you're regurgitating material that you're reading from someplace else. But if you're reporting, you're the one gathering the information. So you're out there in the field, you're finding the story, you're making the story yourself. So I, from the beginning, said I just want to be sure I can get out and at least do some baseball. And in the beginning, I covered some, did stories on various things, and that's what's cool about Comcast SportsNet. I brought up an idea. Andy Talley lives here in the neighborhood, the Villanova football coach, and I said, I want to do a story on the Villanova football team. I mean, they could go all the way this year. Right. And so I went out and I did a story on the Villanova football team, and it's cool to be able to, you have an interest in something and you go out and you do that story.
Yep. Now, we talked a little bit before the show. You've had some pretty neat interviews. Do you want to? What's your most memorable interview you've done?
I mean, probably interviewing George Bush a couple of weeks before 9/11 at the Little League World Series. He was inducted into the Little League Hall of Fame, and big baseball guy, used to own the Rangers years ago.
Yep.
And so that was pretty awesome. I remember my first interviews when I moved back from my first job in Pocatello to Los Angeles. They said concussions are a big hot topic now, but they were several years ago as well. And Lee Steinberg, big-time agent, had this seminar on post-concussion syndrome, and he had 3. I went to cover it, and my 3 interviews that day were Warren Moon, Steve Young, and Troy Aikman. And I'm like, well, this isn't Pocatello anymore. So but there've been a lot along the way. I mean, I reported from the pace car of the Indy 500 right before the start of the race, and that was exciting. Worked at the U.S. Open figure skating, and Sarah Hughes came in second that year, and then she went on, of course, to win the gold medal in the Olympics. So it was a lot of fun.
So did you know you were going to be interviewing the president that day, or was it spontaneous?
I knew not. I knew shortly before that. I think the day before that.
Okay.
But we all went over the questions and how we wanted to go about it. I mean, it was okay, here's Mr. President. You do your interview. I had him sign a baseball, which is not something that you typically do when you're doing interviews. But I wasn't going to pass up the chance.
Oh, no. All right, why don't we take a break and go over to Annie with some entertainment.
Hello, everyone. I am, of course, going to talk about my favorite person in the world as of right now, Rob Pattinson, and he is perfect. So I was reading Vanity Fair, I was reading over his interview, and I found some interesting tidbits of information about him because I would never go as far as to stalk him, but I do like to read about him a lot. So I was reading his interview, and I was very interested to find that before or after his Twilight audition, he said he had been kind of in a bad place for a year, and he wasn't sure if he was going to, continue acting. He was kind of over it, so he goes into this interview, and he's like, whatever. I don't even care. I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to go all out. So he thought that he ruined his audition. He thought it was awful. He was so embarrassed. He thought that his acting career was over. He actually said to his parents that that's it, I'm not doing this anymore. So I was shocked because I'm just so happy that that worked out for him, because if I didn't ever know who Rob Pattinson was, there'd be a hole in my heart. So lucky for Rob, he did get his Twilight role. And another interesting fact about him, before he was an actor, in between his acting gigs, he was actually a musician in a band, and he does play the piano. So he's perfect, obviously, a musician and an actor, and he's kind of like a Renaissance man. So Rob, if you're out there, hey. And that is all for entertainment today. Now back to you guys.
Thank you, Annie.
You guys have the same feelings about Rob Pattinson?
I can't
say I've seen it Twilight.
Okay, now Leslie, you're kind of, when you're not anchoring, your specialty has kind of been the Phillies.
Yep.
So can you talk a little bit about the World Series run this year?
Yeah, it was, I was actually surprised I got back to the World Series, more so because it's so hard to do. Not because of having any doubt in what they could do, but just it just doesn't happen in this day and age. And so that was the core group of guys. One of the things that I'm so impressed with Ruben Amaro is the fact that he's been able to take away people who matter but aren't detrimental to the success of the team, and sign the ones that are important to the success of the team, and then fill those holes. So last year was Raul Ibanez, taking over for Pat Burrell. This year, of course, Pedro Feliz is now gone, and Placido Polanco in the mix. So he makes little moves that make a difference while keeping his core group together.
I mean, yeah, it really was shocking because baseball's a game of inches, and so many things had to go right to get to the World Series and win it in LA, and it's just amazing how they could pull that off 2 years in a row.
Yeah, the comeback wins this year. I mean, it was almost like last year. You got a sense that they were destined to win it. I mean, Shane's mom passing, or grandmother passing away, and Charlie's mom dying, and as things went along in the postseason, you just kept getting the feeling that this was a team that was supposed to win the World Series. This year, not so much. And the biggest shocking comeback for me ever was when Jimmy Rollins hit that 2-run
against the Dodgers.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he kept that game there and did what he did and kept that series and kept them from going back to Los Angeles. Just, I had packed my bags. I was ready to leave. I was looking at flights. I was literally on the internet during the game, looking at flights, going, okay, when am I going to leave? How am I going to get babysitters? You know, and then boom, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we're not going anywhere. So, you know, that was pretty awesome.
So, what was it like covering the Phillies in 2008 when they won the World Championship?
It was, I mean, you know, funny enough, to me, the most exciting moment with the Phillies over the course of the last 2 years, 3 years, was not at the World Series championship. It was when they made it to the postseason 3 years ago. So because they had worked so hard to get there. When I got here in ¡97, I remember going to Veterans Stadium. There's like 8,000 people in the stands. They were 27 games out in August, and I was like, they got a long way to go. So I think the fact that they actually got over the hump, the elation by guys like Jimmy Rollins and Pat Burrell, who'd been there and helped build that franchise, was really cool to be part of that. But last year's run, winning the World Series was awesome.
Right. I mean, I just remember the years prior to them making the World Series, they'd always miss it by like 1 game, 2 games, and you know, it was great to see them get over the hump.
Well, what's funny is, you know, there's this idea that, you know, this is such a glamorous job covering them, but when they won, we were in a tunnel below the stadium, and the network Fox doesn't let you on the field until 10 minutes after the game's over. So we're standing, a bunch of reporters in this hallway, and everybody's saying, you know, 1 out, 2 outs, okay, they won, and you just hear the rumble outside, but you're not part of it at all, and you're thinking, that was so anticlimactic, like I didn't get to enjoy that. So then I went to the Eagles concert at the Wachovia Center about 3 weeks later, and Joe Walsh came out with a Phillies hat on, and they played in the city and had a background of all the stuff going on in Philadelphia, and then they played the final out. And 21,000 people at the Wachovia Center went nuts, and I started to cry. I'm like, oh my God, this is the moment. It wasn't even the game, but I'm like, I got the feeling of what it was like to be there. My husband's like, what is wrong with you? I'm like, you were in the stands. You got to see it. I didn't get to see it.
Now the Phillies just recently signed Placido Polanco. That's got to be, it's a good signing, correct?
I think, yeah. I mean, I think one of the reasons why they let Pedro Feliz go is if you look at the last 2 postseasons, he didn't come through when they needed him to come through. I mean, you look at somebody like Chooch, Carlos Ruiz has been terrific in the postseason. And he might not hit very well during the regular season, but he hits great during the postseason. And I think that was one of the determining factors. And it's a lot of money to pay a guy who's getting older. And I think it was $5.5 million they decided not to pick up. Of course, they're paying Polanco a lot as well. But I think it's that tweaking and not keeping things the same. I think they really believe in sometimes maybe making a lateral move, but making a change to make things better.
Unfortunately, in 2009, the Phillies didn't pull off another World Series win. What do you think was different? You know, what happened during that World Series that didn't allow them to win?
Bradledge and Cole Hamels.
Right.
I think those are your 2.
Yeah,
they were the reason why you won in '08, and they were the reason why you didn't win in '09. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how Cole develops next year, because I think Cole will be right back to where everybody's worried about Cole. He'll be right back to where he started before. He had to deal with some unnecessary controversy in the postseason, which I was right in the middle of both things, and it was very unfair to him. He had a baby after one of his starts. I mean, he's trying to use his curveball as an out pitch, which he hasn't figured out doesn't work yet. So, you know, little things like that
a little loopy.
I think they're going to tweak. I think they'll tweak them in the offseason and try to get him back together. And Bradledge is just psychologically, he just needs a break. Like, you know, he seems to be one of those who goes through mental milestones. You know, once you get past one thing, you know, after having a perfect season, he carried that on him, and then he fell apart. And you know, then he had surgery at the end of the year, which nobody really expected. So maybe he was injured as well, and so I think those are the 2 biggest factors.
So you think it was psychological for both pitchers, their troubles, or not
I think absolutely, but especially with Cole. And I think Cole just hasn't figured out that he's using that 3rd pitch. Rich Doobie went into this whole thing, the pitching coach at the end of the season, about how Cole's pitching off the 3rd base side of the rubber, and he literally had me stand up and show me how that exposes your curveball if you're pitching from that side, because left-handed hitters can see it. And, you know, little things like that are easy fixes. You just have to get in their head, like, these are the types of things that, you need to work on, and that pitch isn't effective as an out pitch, you should mix it in with your other pitches.
Right.
But in his mind, he was shaking Ruiz off a lot at the end of the year, saying, I want to use that as my out pitch.
Now, the other big Philadelphia sports news recently is that Allen Iverson is back with the Sixers. He had a very emotional press conference, I think it was yesterday, which I know you didn't have the chance to see, and I know you'll be seeing later. What do you think of the signing?
You know what, I think it's great. They needed a boost.
Right.
They weren't putting fans in the seats. There wasn't any spark, and the injuries bring that down. And I think had they had a chance to have some of those younger players play more, when Maurice Bates went down, blow number one, but then it's like they just kept coming.
Right.
So I think it's going to be exciting to see Allen. I mean, I hope he tosses the ball off a little bit more. I think that's going to be what this team needs him to do, and not try to carry the load.
How do you think the fans are going to embrace him?
I think it's going to be terrific. I mean, he cried during his press conference. He's probably going to cry when he takes that. I mean, I look forward to hearing, and of course, I'm at winter meetings next week in Indianapolis when they're here, so we're all going to find a place. I think NBA Network's airing the game nationwide, so find a place in here. 6-foot guard out of Georgetown announced, so it'll be fun.
Yeah, sorry, James, but you go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say the ticket sales have boosted already, so it seems like the fans have already started to embrace it.
Yeah, they were waiting in line outside the Wachovia Center as soon as the announcement was made.
Right.
Now, you hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, Allen Iverson's a team killer," but I think he's gonna be great for this team. I mean, the team just lost 8 games in a row, so you can kind of only go up from here.
Yeah, I think he's going to be somebody who's just going to break. You've never heard any teammate. You've heard people talk about Allen negatively, but can you remember a time when you've ever heard a teammate talk negatively about Allen Iverson? He's very well liked in the locker room. They love he's fun. He's got there's a spark to Allen that looks at life in a real happy way, and I think he brings that into the locker room.
And also he plays his heart out every night. Drives into the lane with guys a foot taller than him. So
yeah, I mean, he won't have the speed that he had a few years ago, but he could, like you said, I mean, he can drive the lane with the best of them and get through traffic, and that's when he's a lot of fun to watch.
Alrighty, well, it looks like we're about out of time here on Mainline Morning this morning, but we have a parting gift as always for our guests. We have our very special mug that we get. We get those from the back, and
I'll be filling this shortly. This is an early hour for a sportscaster.
maybe that could go on the Comcast.
Put it on the news desk.
Yeah.
All right, Neil.
Yeah, that would be great.
Alrighty, well, that about does it for Mainline Morning. Leslie Gudel here today. Thanks so much,
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, I'm James Connors.
And I'm Brian Sizik. Have a great day.